Hi everyone, I'm Alana. I know a few of you in the audience, so thanks guys. I am currently an MSc student in Entrepreneurship at Aston, but prior to that I freelanced for several years. We were talking about it before, fell into it by accident. I've always worked with startups, and I was working with a company who could only fund me for a certain period of time, and I really loved them. I wanted to keep working for them, so I was like, why don't I just freelance on the side so I can keep working with this company, make an income, and be able to do both things. And that's what I did. So my background is in UX design and web development. So I do a lot of website design, app design, sort of digital interfaces, and I also do writing. I'll talk about it a little bit later, but I fell into it by accident as well. So my brand is really the full gamut of, if you want to create a website, I can design it for you and write your copy when you're doing it. And I also do marketing as well. I'm the head of marketing for TEDx Aston University right now, and I did it for several companies, especially when everything that has to do with content writing, blog writing. So I'm excited to talk to you about it.
Hello everybody, my name is Grace and I am a freelance creative. So I'm from Birmingham originally, and my background is within marketing, branding and project management. I kind of fell into freelancing as well, so I studied English Literature and History at De Montfort in Leicester. So obviously couldn't make my mind up what I wanted to do with my life, so I chose the two broadest subjects possible. And from there went into a project management / product development role with a manufacturer of hair care, bath and body products. Really loved that because I got to do so many different things. But after 2.5 years in Peterborough there, I moved back to Birmingham, and that's when I really kind of fell into freelancing. I wanted to do something a little bit more creative, wasn't quite sure what that would be. I actually worked in retail for a little bit while I was working that out, and my previous employer just contacted me quite early on to say, did I want to kind of work with them to do some videos, and that was the start of my freelance career. Since then I've kind of stuck within the creative sphere, so doing photography, video, marketing, bit of project management, and that's been with arts organisations. And then last year I worked for Google Digital Garage, so that was a great project based in the city centre, and I was a digital skills coach there and also worked on the partnership programme. So that was like managing different events. And then most recently, I've just kind of gone back to doing smaller freelance projects. And as you can see, I've got lots of curly hair, which is something that I'm really passionate about. And I'm working on my own kind of brand around curly hair. So that's me.
So I think you've answered this a little bit, Grace, but what point did you realise that you could actually make a go of being a freelance?
Oh, it was probably... It probably wasn't early on actually. I was speaking to a couple of the students here and hearing how there's some people who are already kind of doing freelancing a little bit. They've done it for friends and family, then recommended. But I think the term was not necessarily officially freelancing, although I'd say definitely that is. But I was of that kind of mindset as well. I was doing different projects, but I guess it's imposter syndrome, which is you feel like you are a fraud, really. You think, am I really freelancing? But I think it was probably towards maybe 1.5 years in, when I was working for an arts organisation. I was doing a marketing officer role, and then with Google Digital Garage, that was a freelance contract. So that did make me think, yes, I am a freelancer if I am working with the Digital Garage project.
And Alana, I guess do you find it useful being able to do freelance work alongside your studies?
Yes. Well, I will admit that right now I'm probably too busy to be freelancing. I'm doing TEDx, so that kind of takes up my life outside of my modules. However, we were talking about it, how freelancing is a great way to always have something to fall back on. So if you're able to develop your skills and your brand, you'll never be unemployed, basically. You'll always have something to go back to. So after I finish in September, after I finish my modules in March, my plan is to go back to doing some projects on the side, because you can choose how much you want to take on. Right now I'm not taking anything on, but doing my dissertation I can take a little bit on, and when September comes you can take a lot on, and you can sort of organize yourself. So it's definitely really helpful to have that to fall back on. Yeah.
And how did you sort of both decide on what services that you would offer?
So I'm actually not a designer by training. I studied psychology. I taught myself how to design, so I definitely felt the imposter syndrome for a really long time, because I have a lot of friends who did study design in their university studies, and I always felt like, how do I have the right to call myself designer when they studied it formally? But really, you can teach yourself to do anything. So I just felt like that creative side was always in me, and I wanted to develop those skills, and so I did, and that's how I sort of naturally chose, like, I've given these services to certain companies, maybe I can develop it into a freelance design job, and that's how I sort of naturally fell into it. So a lot of it is observing what you like to do in your free time. Do you like to take pictures? Maybe that's something that you're really interested in. Do you like to take videos? And it doesn't have to be something you studied, actually. It can just be something you're naturally interested in that could turn into a form of income.
Yeah, I think I would echo that. Falling into freelancing, it was never kind of sitting down to think about, well, what is it that I'm going to do, what I'm going to offer clients. It was more a case of what I was passionate about. Like yourself, I never really I did English and history at university, so I was self-taught in photography and video, so it was a case of thinking about that creativity and what I could offer through there. And I think portfolios and the work that you can do, whether it's like your personal projects, maybe you're doing some photography on the side, or you're doing a film project, having that there, if you're not confident in being formally trained, actually can count for a lot, and count for a lot for the experience. Perhaps even if it was just a personal project, you've shown the initiative and going out and doing that, and the skills, so showcasing the work that you have done. But yeah, it wasn't like a conscious decision at first.
For sure. It wasn't like, I'm going to do this. Yeah.
And I think you've answered this a little bit, but how would you say you distinguish yourselves from your competitors?
Through the work that I'd done previously in freelancing, a lot of it had come through I guess networking, or knowing like people who needed that opportunity. I was perhaps approached, could you do this, or we've got this opportunity, you're interested, as opposed to me approaching clients with like a package. And because I've done so much in my I've done so many different things, it's hard to pinpoint what it is I actually do, and sometimes I think, what is it that I do? But recently I came across this really interesting TED talk about being, I think it's called a multi-potentialite or a polymath, but it's basically if you're perhaps a creative individual and you might be as passionate about maths as you are as art, actually you might fall within this category of being a polymath, where you're very good at doing lots of different things, you've got lots of different passions and you like to do them all at the same time. And actually, I think it's by Emily Wapnick, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, but there's a great website called Puttylite if you feel like you tick that box. But it just encourages you to think about, well, what's the underlying thing, what's the underlying theme or overarching theme that pulls it together. So I really enjoy being creative, doing photography and video, but I'm quite organised and like managing projects. But I also love to support people, so that's what I did with like Google Digital Garage, and actually help people. So I was recently kind of thinking about, well, how do I differentiate myself from others, and boiled it down to, I like to create experiences, I like to empower people, and I like to implement plans. So those three things, whatever it is I'm doing, kind of tend to be the things for me, as opposed to I'm a photographer, videographer, project manager, brander, ///. I've got those things that drive me. So perhaps if you do feel like you fit into a lot of different categories, having a step back and think about, well, what is it in each one of those? What's the driving factor? And that could be like quite a useful tool to use. But I can only kind of speak from that perspective with myself. So.
I agree. I mean, start with your network, like start with the people that you know. And I would say, I mean, differentiating yourself in the market today is really, really difficult. It's something really hard to do. You might set up a website, you might make yourself a logo. There's a million designers, there's a million photographers, writers. When it really comes down to it, is customer service. If you can provide someone an experience that they're just like, wow, it was so easy to work with you, you did exactly what I needed, they're gonna recommend you to everyone they know. And then for me, I worked with startups, so I worked with a startup and they had startup friends that were like, hey, do you need a designer? This person's really good, go hire her. And when it really comes down to it, if you provide customer service that is better than what other people would experience in the market, people are gonna keep hiring for sure. And that's probably the best way to differentiate yourself. Because there's going to be a million people who do what you do, but people will remember you for who you are personally.
So now maybe we can look at some of the essentials that people in the room, if they're thinking of starting out being a freelancer, what they might need to know. So I'm thinking of in terms of maybe the legals, finances, those kind of things. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about your experiences of that. Sure.
So many mistakes in the beginning. I have done so many contracts that I haven't gotten paid for. Like it happens. Set yourself up and use software that helps you. Like I used Upwork. There's a lot of different websites you can do. Freelancer.com, Upwork. There's one called TopTal if you are like a top designer and whatnot. These platforms will set you up with things like filing taxes, legal, having the right contracts to protect you from someone taking advantage of you. So there's a lot of things that come prepackaged, and the great thing about those platforms as well is the quantity. There's so many people coming on all the time that are looking for work to be done. So there's always an influx of potential customers, but definitely insulate yourself with software that already has prepackaged contracts, prepackaged legal, prepackaged tax systems, because people will take advantage of you for sure.
Certainly just get a handle on the legal side of it. So setting up for tax, like you say, thinking about contracts, having a think about, what it is with contracts. You might go by a certain rate or based on a certain scope of work, but what if that changes? Making sure you're factoring into a project as it grows and develops, and ensuring that your time is still covered and your time isn't just you doing that work, but it's also the admin time as well, and are you factoring that into your rate? So there's great organisations out there in terms of the support side, and I definitely recommend using an organisation like Aston Enterprise with some of those legal things, thinking about confidentiality agreements or intellectual property, copyright. I made lots of mistakes. For a little while, my rate was dictated to me as opposed to me negotiating. And sometimes pricing can be a difficult one to broach, especially if you're just starting. It's like, well, what do I, you can pluck a number out the air and hope it's the right one. It's okay to maybe have a conversation with the client, find out what other individuals in your industry are charging. So I think as much research as possible, and ensure that financially you are factoring in for admin time. But I would say this one thing which I never thought about when I first started. Think about your pension. Think about, are you factoring in, as you are freelancing, you're taking, your salary, you might be saving for your tax bill, but what about pension or holidays or sick pay? Those are the kinds of things that you do need to factor in, and especially early on, because when you're employed, you don't really have any choice with some of those things. So if you can get a handle on them as soon as possible, it's only going to make your life easier.
Thank you. So are you both sole traders, or have you set up as a limited company?
So I'm a sole trader.
I am as well, although I have I have a company entity name, but I haven't filed as an LLC or anything. It's just easier. Like, for example, I'm sure if you start freelancing, you're going to want to list this on your CV somehow if you decide to go into the workforce later. So maybe having like a company name that represents you is a good way to be able to list it later on a CV and saying like, this is me as a contractor, my company, and these are all the products I did under it, or the ones you want to showcase. That's why I did mine, yeah.
How do you sort of manage your finances when you're freelancing? Because do you find that you're getting jobs coming in all the time, or is there some periods when you're not quite so busy? How do you sort of manage that?
So it would be lovely if there were jobs coming in all the time, and that's not necessarily the reality. I think it's sometimes a case of seasons, and sometimes, from my personal experience, sometimes there has been projects, and often they've come one after the other, and then there are quieter times. So I think planning ahead, but for me, when I first started freelancing, as I mentioned, I was working in retail part-time, and that was just when I came back to Birmingham, just wanted something to keep me going. And I kept doing that for a little while whilst I was freelancing, and then took on another PAYE role as my contracts developed. It was only a year and a half in that I went full-time freelance. So for me, it was just having other extra income on the side that I knew would come in month by month. And that might be the way to start off for some people, is maybe you're not ready to take that plunge to go full-time freelance. So it might be a case of having a part-time job that you know is kind of going to be steady income, and maybe go for a role that actually is going to benefit your freelance work as well. So it might be in a related industry, or if you're wanting to go into marketing, maybe you could do a role doing, like, I don't know, social media management. It's only going to perhaps enhance what you're doing as a freelancer.
No, I agree. I mean, I think especially the beginning, I'll speak to my specific experience with Upwork. That's where I got most of my contracts, especially, besides a few from the side where people would recommend it and be like, hey, can you do this? Most of my contracts are from Upwork. Getting started is really difficult because you're starting from scratch. The website runs completely on reviews. So once you finish a contract, people review you. You get to a point where you have a lot of reviews and people just request you, like, can you do this job? And those come in pretty frequently. But I would say the first 3 or 4 months, you're really taking on jobs that you wouldn't want to do yourself. It's just a job, so you can build a reputation. So I think I agree, those first 3 or 4 months, it's good to have. I was working at the startup on the side, so that was helpful because the first few months, it really is, I did stuff during those first 3 or 4 months that I would never put on my portfolio because I just hated it and I hated working on it. But after you get through that first hurdle, more frequently there's things coming in pretty steadily, I would say, and people are requesting you and asking for you much more. So I would say don't give up in the beginning because it almost stabilizes after a certain point. And it's not consistent, but it is a steady flow in your way instead of you requesting things.
Thank you. So I've got down here about how do you find your first customer, and I think you've answered that, and different probably experiences for both of you. Have you actually had to do much sort of marketing yourself? And the other thing I was going to ask is, people talk about the importance of having a personal brand. How important is that to you? Could you maybe talk a little bit about that?
So in terms of the marketing side, I would say me personally, I would probably say I'm still quite early on in my freelancing. So I've not done lots, I wouldn't say, I've got a dedicated website and I have, all my business cards all sorted. A lot of the work that projects I've worked on has been through, I guess it's networking, and that's where personal brand does come in. And I think you were saying, Alana, is you build up a reputation for what you do and also how you do it. And I think that can come through using, social media, having some online presence, but also not forgetting the value of offline as well, and building relationships with people and just having a conversation. So for me, I think personal brand is important, and it is going back to how do you differentiate yourself as a competitor in the market. But whilst I haven't done extensive marketing, that is something that is useful to do, whether it is on certain sites. So we're talking about a creative platform, The Dots, earlier on with some of the students. So thinking about what tools you can use, whether it's creating your website and also using what's out there as well.
Yeah, creating a personal brand is important, but I would say don't get too bogged down by it either. I have a website that I created just with a few pieces of the things I've done. I have never had a single client be like, oh, I found you on your website. It's just not something that happens very frequently. So if you want to set up your personal presence and start building your brand, definitely do it. Don't spend more than 2 days on it. Like set up a Wix website, something really simple, just like one single page that says who you are if people Google you. But that comes with experience and time. So it's definitely more about defining what it is that you want to do and how you want to sell it, and everything kind of comes with it afterwards. So some recommendations: LinkedIn, website, try to have the language be cohesive so that they link together, but don't spend more than a couple days setting it up tops. It happens afterwards for sure.
You touched on sort of some social media, so LinkedIn is quite a big one for both of you. Any others that Lana said not so much Facebook. How about you, Grace?
So definitely LinkedIn. I did get one of my contracts through LinkedIn. I was like, how did you find me on LinkedIn? But yeah, definitely LinkedIn is a great platform. And I think then you need to think about, well, what industry are you in and where perhaps would your customers or clients be looking? For me, building a brand around curly hair, and that's something that I want to be doing moving forward. I use Instagram because I know that's where a lot of brands live and are connecting with customers. That's where a lot of the customers and individuals are going to find my content interesting and going to be. Twitter as well. I mentioned The Dots. And I think it is just having to think about, well, where is your audience going to be? Who are you speaking to? Who are you wanting to connect with? And finding where they live and having a presence there.
Yeah, no, I agree. A little tip for LinkedIn. I've seen a lot of students have just like student at Aston University or MSc candidate. If you're going to start freelancing, I have UX designer on my LinkedIn headline. And I get a lot of recruiters find me because of the headline. So, and those recruiters usually offer short-term contracts. So that's a great way to get started, like technical writer, if you're gonna do writing, or like photographer. Recruiters will find you because they have, it's like an algorithm basically. That's like, oh, find everyone in Birmingham that does X, and they'll message you out. And that's a great way to connect with companies in the area. Even if you don't take out their contracts, they'll connect you to different people. So I would say LinkedIn, and then I'll mention it again. Upwork is great just because it tracks your reviews. So if you have all 5-star reviews, that lives on the internet forever. People will be able to find you that way, for sure. Those are my top 2. I'm not very good with Twitter, I'll be honest.
I think another thing that I'd say about like LinkedIn, all those platforms is, and it goes back to a little bit about how you differentiate yourself, but it's an opportunity for you to showcase, like through doing LinkedIn posts, is your expertise, so your maybe thought leadership, or why you're passionate about what it is that you are doing. So for perhaps somebody who's looking at working with you, they get a bit more insight into who you are as opposed to just your profile. So do use those tools that are available to give a bit more insight about who you are.
How do you connect, or indeed do you connect with other freelancers? Have you found sort of communities, in the region, and do you get any benefits from that?
Early on I didn't. I wasn't really aware of maybe communities that exist. But now I'm a bit more a bit more aware of their presence. And there's one that I go to every month on a Thursday called Creators Club, which is a networking group for creators in Birmingham. There might be startups or you might be freelancers. I've gone to different networking events, whether it's within marketing or again around creatives, and I have found it very useful. It can be quite an isolating experience being a freelancer. If you're working from home, you can go stir crazy, you're just looking at the same four walls and you maybe don't speak to anybody all day. And even just the experiences like not getting paid by a client or getting caught out by a contract, it can be really helpful just to soundboard those issues with other freelancers. I have tended to work at home or where the project has demanded, but also co-working spaces are a great place to connect with other freelancers, a freelancing community, and there are lots popping up in Birmingham. And perhaps if you're looking, if you need a recommendation, so at one point I was looking for somebody to support with video on a project that I was working on, and I was like tearing my hair out a little bit, but I was at Impact Hub and I was just telling somebody, and they found me this amazing videographer through their network. So sometimes it can be really useful to build those networks, and I would say be generous. Recommend other people to other people as well. Be open and share that kind of those recommendations. Just because it's useful, you're going to help somebody else, but also you are building your network, and you don't know what point down the line they might recommend you as well. So definitely, I think that has been a turning point for me in my experience, is being able to connect with other freelancers.
I'll admit, since I got to Birmingham, I haven't had the opportunity to connect with freelancer networks as much, but when I was in Puerto Rico before coming here, I worked out of a co-working space as well, and I really had no reason to go. Like, I could work from home, but there's something in just having the structure of like, I'm going to work now, and now I'm not going to be at work, because you could really be working 24/7 as a freelancer. So it's having almost like setting up imaginary structures for yourself so that you don't drive yourself crazy. And I agree with that. At least for designers, there's so many different softwares, resources popping up all the time, and if you're not around people who are doing it, you're never going to find out about it, like, at all. So it's good to meetups. There's so many meetups around stuff like this. So if you want to get started, just even showing up to a meetup, even if you haven't started freelancing yet, is a great way to get started.
So maybe sort of reflecting a little bit now. So what would you say biggest pros and cons about freelancing?
A biggest pro, sometimes you want to take a week off, you can do it. If you want to be working on a project in your pajamas at midnight on a Sunday, you can do that as well. You want to work on a project while visiting a different country, you can do that for sure. Cons, it is very isolating. Like, you can go weeks without seeing people for sure. There's some great projects that take you to different places. Like, I was on a project this summer that I had to travel to Miami, and that was amazing. But there are some projects where you just have to do it and not leave your house for a week, So that's definitely one of the big cons.
I think I'd echo that. I think the flexibility is definitely a pro of freelancing, in terms of your time, in terms of the projects that you're working on. So I think it's maybe having a think about what you want for your career, and maybe different seasons and stages of your career and your life as well, because at one point freelancing might work really well, you might really need that flexibility, but another season of your life, you might need consistency or that kind of security of knowing that you're going to get a paycheck every month and it's going to be the same amount and you're not going to have to chase HR for it. So I guess it depends what you're looking for. I've had the opportunity to, work as a freelancer and work, for companies as well. And definitely gaining experience in both is only going to, make for a great CV, but also your professional experience. So I think the flexibility for me, and as I mentioned, being a creative and wanting to do everything, it's great to have that variety of different projects. But the cons is it can be quite isolating when you are starting up. It can be quite difficult to navigate where to start, what to do, and if you haven't got a support network around you, whether that is an organisation like Aston Enterprise or a community of freelancers, it can be quite difficult to navigate, and it's not the same security necessarily as having a 9-to-5. So it's just weighing it up and working out what's right.
And the last pro, I'll mention it again, you'll never be unemployed. Like, you'll always have something to fall back on, and that's probably my favorite part. Like, I'm gonna go into a full-time corporate job, but I know that if I lose that tomorrow, I can always freelance, and that's something that's like a superpower almost. Yeah.
What would you both say has been sort of your biggest success when you've been freelancing?
I think for me, looking back on the different projects that I've worked on, working for the couple of arts organisations and then working for the Digital Garage project, that was something that did come through LinkedIn, and that was one of the best projects I have worked on, and it was an opportunity to use all the skills that I have and also impart some wisdom to other people as well, because there was a lot of coaching and mentoring. But also my freelancing up to date has given me the flexibility now to be able to look at what's next, which is me wanting to work more on a brand around curly hair, and all the experiences I've had to date and the people I've worked with, and also having that flexibility in terms of time has allowed me to do that, which it's a great opportunity to have.
This is gonna sound quite cheesy, but I just really like making people happy. Like, I think the best part, it's weird, like the best part is like finishing a project and someone being like, thank you so much for doing this. Like, I don't know how I could have done this without you. I worked on a project this summer with some students from Boston University, and they were starting a company, and they were like going crazy with this company. They're like so busy, and they had almost no budget, and they were trying to build this website, and I gave them I was like, I'm gonna give you a startup discount to help you build this website. And I worked on it for a month, and I ended up like setting up their beta site, I suppose. And they were just so great they were just like, I don't know what we would have done. Everyone else was so expensive. Thank you for doing this. And there's nothing more satisfying almost than experiencing that, yeah.
And then maybe on the flip side, can you perhaps tell us about something when something went horribly wrong, or when it nearly did and you had to, what you had to do to get it back under control?
So I think contracts, I think that's definitely something that's caught me out in the past. And just having a clear idea with the client what it is that's been agreed, and everybody being on the same page and what that looks like. So I've had an experience in the past where it hasn't quite been. I was on one page, the client was on another, and unfortunately we kind of went further and further apart. And actually, I think you were saying, Alana, there's nothing greater in being a freelancer than being able to give that job satisfaction and actually solving a problem for the client. And also professional working relationships come into it as well. And at a point I was a little bit worried about, where it would go. And in the end, it was just having a frank conversation, and it was able to be resolved. But I think that's where you do need to be up on, using contracts that are already there, making sure you're allowing for for changes in the scope of the project. And I have had experience of, invoices not being paid and chasing months and months afterwards. And that's just I think we were saying, you know, lots of freelancers tend to have that experience. It's not necessarily, you're not the exception to the rule. But again, that's being clear right at the start of the project, or, you know, what I should have done in that instance was setting up a payment plan. So rather than just waiting to the end of the project and, you know, having the payment there, but saying, you know, 50% at point A and then the rest of it after the project continues. So again, that's doing some of that upfront setup work. You might be able to avoid those mistakes. But I was able to get some really great advice, you know, from a couple of different individuals, which made the difference in being able to handle it well. So, yeah.
I mean, to be honest, sometimes you're just not gonna vibe with clients. Like, you're just not gonna click. So a lot of the times clients ask you for one thing and they think they want that one thing, and then you give it to them and they're like, actually, I want this completely different thing that might not have been communicated, because sometimes people just don't know what they need or want. I had plenty of times where I've done writing jobs where I finish writing something out and they're like, I honestly hate your writing style. So, and that just happens. Even if you provided them with a sample in the beginning, it kind of happens. And it's kind of learning how to manage communication more than anything else. Like, how do you manage expectations? And sometimes even if you manage those expectations as well as you can't really control what happens in the end. And two is, when you do find yourself disagreeing or in a bad situation, it's communicating in a way that it's productive. And that sort of comes with experience. The first few times you're like, wow, I handled that terribly. It could have gone much better, but you get better with time, really.
So in a minute, we're going to be opening up the floor for you guys to ask some questions. So really, this is my last couple of questions to you. And I suppose, what would be sort of the best piece of advice you could give to some of the people in the room who are thinking about starting out their own freelancing business?
You are worth more than you think when you're pricing yourself out. Do not underprice yourself. Like, you might be like, oh, I don't have a portfolio. Yes, you do. I'm sure that when you're starting something out, it's because you might be already kind of good at it, and you could set something up to show evidence that you're worth a certain price. I will recommend, if you're going into things like UX design, graphic design, that sort of thing, web development, there is a website called itjobswatch.co.uk. You might want to Google that, itjobswatch.co.uk. They'll give you all of the industry market price for how do you price yourself as a contractor per hour. And that is showing like a contractor, like a potential client evidence, like, here, this is not just me pricing myself, this is what the industry says I'm worth. And that's a good way to insulate yourself, but you're definitely worth more than you think.
I think that's a really, really good piece of advice, actually. Mine was going to be just researching, so knowing what you're going into. You know, if you are passionate about, you know, a skill that you have, don't be put off, but do go in with your eyes open and, you know, have that research there. But definitely know your value. It is easy to go into freelancing and say, oh, you know, I'm just starting out, I'll just do it for free or very minimal. You know, you don't necessarily have to do that. If you can evidence the work that you have done, know your value, and sometimes that is understanding what other people around you are charging, and it's just having that information there. And yeah, I think I would encourage you to explore it, have the information there as a tool, the knowledge that you need to go into it, but it is, you know, an option for many people. Have a think about what you want for your career. Is it that flexibility? So yeah, that would be right.
And finally, for me, what's next for the pair of you?
Well, I'm studying, so probably continue to study, but actually I've been offered a full-time role starting in February. So I probably will be freelancing April to February. And as I mentioned, I've been reached out to by recruiters in Birmingham because of LinkedIn having that tagline. So I'm connecting to a few local companies and hopefully taking on some contracts in that period of time before going into full-time role. And then who knows, maybe I'll hate the job and like I'll go back to freelancing, who knows? But I mean, hopefully not. But the point is, you can do that. Like, that's a power that you have. Yeah.
So I'm going to be continuing freelancing, but one of my focuses is launching, I guess it's a media platform around curly hair. So I did a couple of events last year just around the curl community in Birmingham and Manchester, but that's something that I'm really passionate about. So my freelancing is giving me the flexibility to explore that a bit more as building a brand and building something around that. So yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Right, thank you very much. So guys, have you got some questions for Grace and Alana?
How do you price your services and how has that changed over time?
Yes, that's a very good question. Writing wise, the way you do it is you price per word. That's usually the industry standard. So I charge 10 cents per word. But if you are like a professional writer, if you write for magazines or whatnot, that can go up to like 20 or 30 cents per word. So you can kind of calculate like a write-up of 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 words. That's usually how you do it for writing. Some people like to do it where you charge per hour, and that's perfectly fine as well. It also depends kind of on the client and their preference. For UX design, it depends on the company I'm working with. So usually for startups, I'll charge a little bit less because I like working with startups. I started charging 35, this is in dollars an hour, and now I'm up to $75 an hour, sometimes 100, depending if it's a really big company. So it kind of, you work around, you kind of have a range that you work with, right? And you don't go below that range, but you can go above depending on the client you're working with and also the budget that they have. So definitely have room to be flexible, but if you have an absolute minimum, this is my absolute minimum, I'm not going below that, you stick to your guns and that's how you price it.
Yeah, I'd say in the past I have done like hourly rate. And like I said, I was beginning it was kind of dictated to, and I didn't really have the confidence to negotiate that. And it was only through experience and doing research and understanding perhaps what the value of the work was, but also it isn't just that work as well, it's, you know, the administration time around that too, so factoring that in. I know through sometimes when you go through business development with organisations like Aston Enterprise, sometimes they'll do like you'll work out what you'll need to live on. I can't remember what it's called, but it might be like your survival budget or something, and that sometimes can help you work out, you know, based on different projects, what you'll need to be charging. Sometimes it really does depend on the project, whether it is hourly or a project fee.
Yes.
And then it's just ensuring that within the contract, if things do go outside of the scope that you've agreed, how you'll manage that. Will that be a separate estimate? Will there be a number of revisions before actually it's gone outside of this project budget, and actually you're going to need to have another conversation. So yes, I would say having a think about, like Alana suggested, that base rate that you're not going to go under, but then on different projects, I know I've in the past when I'm working with like a startup also kind of negotiated around their budget too.
Yeah, sometimes people will be like, honestly, our budget is 5K for this period of time. And then it's up to you to kind of decide, like, is this something that is reasonable? How much time? Like, is it 5K full time for 3 months? Well, that obviously doesn't make a lot of sense. So it kind of depends on the client and what their budget is as well. So, but having sort of your limits of, I'm not gonna say yes to something below this is, yeah.
And make sure you factor in for tax as well, because it might be you know, this amount, but after 20% tax, and then your student loan contribution, you know, are you still getting that same amount that you thought you were? So just being aware of all those different factors.
I just wanted to ask, because you know that usually when people do the usual 9-to-5 job, they have things like their pension plan in place and stuff. So where do you see yourself in like 20, 30 years? Or is there anything you're doing to secure your financial status when, you know, freelancing isn't really like much of an option anymore?
So I think pensions is really important to think about. It's a difficult question for me, 20, 30 years time, but I know that making sure that, you know, the income that's coming through that you are setting some aside for pension and also for sick days, because you are the only person who's going to allow yourself that, and also time off as well. I'm going to be honest and say I've not set up anything formally, but I know that it is important. So I'd encourage you at the start of your journey to make sure that you are factoring those things in. I think in the economic climate that we're in, and from an employer perspective, it's something that's really been pushed, that they need to factor in for their employees' pension. You are essentially your own boss, so you do need to factor that in as well. And I know there's probably information out there through business support organisations that might be able to point you in the right direction in terms of formal structures that you might be able to pay within or set yourself up. But it is, you are on definitely the right lines to start thinking about that, and as early as you start, the better.
Definitely. I mean, part of picking your price has to do with not just how much you need to live, but how much you're going to set aside for savings and for things like your pension. So I had, the way I priced myself was with that in mind, like this is what I need to live and this is how much I'm going to be able to set aside per month and save and save and save. So because you are your own HR person, I suppose, you sort of, when you choose your price, it's with that in mind. Like it's not just, I'm making this and spending it. It's how much am I putting towards savings and how much do I want to put towards savings? Because sometimes when you get to a certain point with freelancing, you might be able to be charging more than you would be making at like a corporate job. So you might be able to find yourself saving more after you've been doing it for a certain period of time. Yeah.
So I want to bring you guys back to when you started freelancing. I'm pretty sure when you start, you don't really know your own capacity of how much work you take on. So I assume you take multiple projects on at the same time, right? I was wondering, during that period, did you guys ever face burnout? Because I assume freelancers are probably most commonly associated with burnout. And what tips would you give us as potential freelancers to avoid that? Maybe make that learning experience a bit faster for on our side?
I think definitely, yeah. It's very easy when you are working at home as well, just to, I'll just do this, I'll be sitting down here, and I'll just look at this, I'll just finish this project off. And it can be, like Alana said, 24/7 and, not actually giving yourself a day off. So I think managing your time is really important, and you are the only person who can do that. Thinking about what you can realistically achieve within, the hours of the day, and where you can put those structure and routine in. So saying, actually, I'm going to be working in a co-working space and going out 9 to 5, and this is the amount of time that I'm going to set myself this week to do the projects. It is a case of managing your time, and I think one of the things I wrote down was give yourself a day off as well. It is okay to have days off. Make sure that you are factoring that in when you are taking on multiple projects. Are you giving yourself space to breathe, really? So just maybe planning ahead. I don't know what you would...
As Grace said, I mean, I made the mistake of when I started, I was always on my phone, I was always on my computer. Like I never took a moment. I was sitting at dinner on my computer, like on a vacation on my computer. It's just something that, especially when you find projects that you really like, you're like, I want to do everything all at the same time. And 100%, like I definitely burnt out. And a lot of it is trial and error though. You'll find what your cadence is. So you'll find like actually taking 3 projects on is too much, 2 is the max for me. And then you'll find the projects that are priced for you to be able to achieve that. But it's definitely trial and error. And in the beginning, when you are doing something that you like, you're gonna want to do it all. You're gonna do all the projects, and you're gonna be like, this is all super exciting. But it's learning about how to manage your time. Yeah, for sure.
Do you have any insurances or anything?
I don't, but
that's a really good point to raise. So I do, but I only got the insurances because it was a demand of a contract that I had to do. But yes, do think about, sometimes it's just role specific. So whether it is like liability or indemnity insurance. So I have insurance. My provider is Hiscox Insurance, so that's just who I've gone with. It was a name that I knew other people had gone with it, and actually what it also had with it was free legal, like I could ring them up and ask my legal questions, which was great for me because I'm a little bit of sometimes I'm a worrier about legal things, so I'll just ask them and know that, you know, they'll be able to give me some legal advice. But yes, that is a really important point to think about, especially maybe if you are working with the public. So I've done some photography in the past. When I was working, you know, in the digital garage space, I had to have my own insurance to really ensure that if something happened, I wasn't personally going to be responsible. So again, it's just going back to research and what is, you know, what do you need? Speaking to maybe other people who are already in the industry and finding out, you know, what do they do? But that's a great point to raise, because I didn't know until like perhaps a year into the freelancing and the type of work that I was doing that I actually needed it. And you do need to cover yourself. There's nobody else who's necessarily going to think about those things for you.
I don't, but
it
maybe
depends.
I should look, yeah.
It depends. I think it depends.
It depends, yeah. And I think that all of my friends who are designers really don't either. So I guess it really depends on what you want to go into, for sure. Research it.
One last.
Yeah, from the start of your project, what consists of both of you is, what's your work process like?
Oh, that's a really good question. I had to get an app that is installed on my computer called Timely. That tracks every single thing I do on my computer. And because it's really, when you're working on multiple projects at once, it's very hard to sometimes differentiate what you're working on when. And that's really important because you gotta bill people for your time. So my work process was, I got that app, and that basically allows me to, starting at 8 a.m. until 5 or 6 p.m. work, without having really to think about what I'm doing at each time, because it tracks exactly what I'm doing. It like tracks your browser, but it also tracks applications on your computer, so that then you can go back at the end of the day and track like this are the amounts of hours you worked on this and this and this. And so really looking for software that helps you manage, obviously use like a calendar app to schedule your day. I'm pretty old school. I just like use notes and like write down like these are my to-do things. But I guess I don't have much of a structure. I owe everything to Timely because I am really terrible at tracking what I'm doing at any given time. Yeah.
I would say, so some of my projects that I've worked on have been like more freelance in-house roles, so I'll be going to that workplace, and I think that is just working out with the client, you know, what is the scope of the project. Sometimes that's ongoing, but definitely tracking your time and what you've done in that time. So I have just tended to use like timesheet, so just Excel. I'm gonna have to check out Timely. Yeah. Thank you.
Honestly.
But for those kind of roles, I've just needed to track the time that I'm working on the project and also what's been achieved. And also that's for me just to be able to, when I'm sending an invoice at the end of the month, being able to evidence if there is any, you know, questions about, you know, this time, this is what we achieved during this period that we were working together.
Yeah, so basically having a structure, like what hours of the day you're gonna work, and trying to track as much as possible what you're doing so that at the end you're able to protect yourself and bill correctly for your clients.
Great, thank you. Well, I think we all ought to put our hands together to show appreciation for Grace and Alana.